My name is Peter Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
So you're collecting data. Now what? How do you take data and make it into usable information? And more importantly, how do you create a culture of using that information to make good decisions? Good morning. My name is Peter Blakely, and welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. This is a 30-minute conversation with the leaders of mission-based organizations about leading through challenging times. If you're joining us live, please let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. I'm joined by my co-host, Cynthia Rojas. Good morning, Cynthia.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Cynthia is the founder and principal of To Your Growth. Today, Cynthia, we are talking about taking information and using it in an organization to make decisions.
I'm loving the conversation. I love the topic.
What are some of the obstacles that we have seen in our career? What have you seen, Cynthia?
Oh my. First, I call it data diversion. When you are having a conversation about data you have gathered at an organization, whether that's an employee survey or you're gathering data from your participants, and the conversation becomes about why the data is flawed or why the survey is flawed.
That is a great term for that.
Oh my God. And so I have sat in a lot of rooms. Mm-hmm. And as I progress in my career, I would go into some rooms and I would start with, this is not a conversation about what's wrong with the data. This is a conversation about the data. But Peter, do you find that in your work also?
It happens all the time.
Oh,
absolutely.
Good.
Let's talk about why. Let's talk about why we think that happens. I think the number one reason that happens is, one, it's defensiveness and fear, right? This is a way to avoid having a conversation that people think is going to be about how they didn't do their jobs well, right? And they think it's going to be a negative and uncomfortable conversation about them, not for them. The other reason is that they never bought into these measures and what they mean, before we started to have this sensitive conversation. And I think that's why it's really important to talk about the measures and reach a level of agreement about how we're going to use them and what they mean, and what their flaws are before we start trying to use them.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So yes, and I'll tell you a quick story. So when I was in graduate school, I got my master's in research, and I've always seen data as the tool that helps make things happen and can create transformative change. So for me, I always perceive data in the positive light, and it was such an eye-opener when I started working and realizing people don't see it that way. Actually, my first job after school was at an organization where no one spoke to me for 6 months. They wouldn't pick up the phone, reply to my email, because I was the data person, and they thought that I was in there to investigate their work. Where I was trying to gather data to understand the impact that they were having. And so there's a nuance there that's important to understand, because it could make or break your career as an evaluator. And it was really tough, really, really tough. People really frown against data.
A very, very important distinction to make about whether you are measuring the program and its impact or whether you are measuring the people and their work. Right. So sometimes when I talk about what I do, people will say, oh, like this is an HR function. You're measuring the people's performance. And I always say, no, Right. No. I don't measure like whether people are doing their job. I measure whether whether their organization and their program is effective, right? So that they can make better decisions. But in an organization or in a program where the program doesn't have really clear outcomes, it becomes personal, right?
Yeah.
And if people have been making decisions on their own, right, without formal data, just based on their gut, then when you start to question those decisions and you say, we're going to bring out evidence and we're all going to have something to say about the program that you've been running that's very close to your heart for a long time, yeah, it's pretty uncomfortable and threatening.
Yeah. And I love, when you were planning the show, you mentioned this is about the culture. We're not going to have a technical conversation about data.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the conversation. I do want to say Renee is watching. Hi, Renee. How are you?
Yeah.
Nice to see you again, or to hear that you're on again. I don't see her, but I feel like I do.
The feeler.
This is all we got is a computer screen these days. But anyway, so thank you, Renee. So yeah, and culture is really important, right? Because whenever I do presentations with organizations or I help them build a data collection infrastructure, I really focus on the positive, right? So you want to see.
I think Cynthia froze for a minute. But let me pick up that thought until she comes back. You want to build infrastructure where you've rehearsed a lot of these behaviors in advance, right? Where you practice the conversation before it's personal, and where you have a structure for holding that conversation so that it doesn't get into data avoidance and fear and conversations about whether or not people are doing their jobs, because that should not be public.
Yeah. Did I zone out?
You froze for a second. Yeah.
Okay. I thought, because my screen went blank. So, and I was saying, I don't remember what I was saying, but
Focusing on positive, I think.
yeah, really coming in from a positive perspective. And if you're not achieving the outcomes, looking at it from a comprehensive standpoint. So not just saying, why is this case manager, what is this case manager doing wrong that participants are not meeting their goals? No, that's not the only lens you want to wear. You also don't want to wear the lens of, well, what's wrong with the participants? But really look at it from an ecosystem. What are the things that we have in place? Are they working? Are there gaps? Are there vulnerabilities to our process? There's this thing I call customer journey mapping. I didn't name it. I'm sorry. But I use that framework where we take organizations through the journey of what their participants experience going through their programs, right? So when you do that walk, literally walking through all the steps, it'll be interesting to see where the gaps are and where there are vulnerabilities. And I'll give you an example. So I was working with a nonprofit who had an intake process. And so I asked to see all the intake paperwork. It is all standard. There's nothing wrong with it. It's all very standard. This organization serves a large proportion of Spanish-speaking individuals. I said, okay, do you have the Spanish version? And they don't. They don't have their intake forms in Spanish. And I thought, well, that's crazy. How do your participants fill out the form? And so the case manager translates it for them. That's such a time-consuming process, right? Meanwhile, it's also not fun for the person sitting there watching you trying to read something and translate it at the same time, right? And so things like that, that's what I mean about the ecosystem, right? Is really looking at it from different perspectives.
Yeah, and it's not fair to the participant or the case manager to make the case manager translate, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it makes the participant feel like, oh, this space was not really designed for me, and this person is doing extra work, right, to make it work for me, and it's taking advantage of the fact that the case manager might be able to translate to have them do unpaid translation work on top of their work.
yeah. So we
Yeah.
have a comment from Renee. So Renee understands this pain. I must
Mhm.
say, data is the pink elephant in the room that's not clearly
Yep.
understood by all. So it's easy to shy away from the numbers. And so Renee, if possible, it would be great to get an example from you in terms of like what resistance you've met, because
Mhm.
we see it. This is natural, I think.
Yeah, and I think again, it's thinking that it's just numbers, as opposed to a proxy that we monitor that indicates the health of our program,
Mm,
right? You
yeah.
know, it's it, it's it's never going to capture everything about your program. It's an
Right,
indicator that some things are headed in the right direction,
right, right.
right? And if you understand that in advance and you understand how it indicates that you're headed in the right direction, it's a lot less scary, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I had a meeting with a recent nonprofit organization where I conducted a survey of their board members. And it was so beautiful to watch this group of older men, actually, their board is mostly men, want to understand the data deeper. So I don't often go through every question and look at every table and tell you the percent, that because that's painful for anybody to watch. But that's exactly what they wanted. They really, their sense making process was deep. And I was like, wow, what a deep. Not once did they question the data. Not once did they question, well, maybe it's this person that went that way and this person answered this way. They wanted to understand why things were so spread out, which in the data world we call variability,
Mhm.
right? They wanted to understand what that meant. And it was
And
great.
variability is something that's so often obscured in the data,
Hmm.
and it's so important. So, I mean, that's a great conversation to be having.
Hmm. Let's just for our non, I mean, you and I can talk data all day.
Right.
Non-data people, what do we mean by variability?
Yeah, and what is the spread outness of the
Right.
data? So
This hand gesture I keep doing.
in our minds, we're drawing normal curves, and then
Oh,
we're showing you the
all the
length of
time.
our curves. That's why we keep doing this.
My life is a bell curve. That's all I think about actually is bell
Yeah.
curve.
So here's why. The example that I have in my head is a Likert type scale. Let's say we asked people, how well is this program meeting your needs? And people answered on a scale of 1 to 5. Often we average those and we say 3. This program is perfectly average, and that's what happens to restaurant reviews on Yelp, right? Which is why the average review is always a 3. But the reality is, nobody goes on Yelp to say this was the most average restaurant I ever ate at, and I can't even remember it, right? They went on Yelp to say it was 1, it was terrible, and an awful experience, or it was a 5, it was fantastic, it was the best experience, right? So when you average, you erase the variability and you erase the really interesting story, which is some people think it's great and some people hate it. Now, when you're in a mission-based organization, that variability really, really matters, right? Because some people might be having a great experience and some other people might be having a terrible experience, right? And not just bad in the sense of being a bad meal, but degrading or humiliating or frustrating or really compounding their stress in a very stressful time, like really, really bad. And if you can dig into that variability and understand, are there certain populations that we're not serving well, right? Are people feeling really upset that they can't complete these forms in their first language and they feel like we're not catering to them or we're not here for them? Are we speaking to people in ways that are seen as disrespectful in certain cultures? Are we just not available to people who need to get to us on public transportation? Are we running our programs at a time that are just really impractical and inconsiderate to parents of young kids, right? The variability is where the juicy information is that helps you really, really make your program better.
Yeah, you highlighted a couple of things. So just to make this really concrete, if you have staff who are leading workshops and you have a couple of workshops and some are highly attended and some are not, before determining that the least attended workshop is probably due to the presenter, you touched on a couple of things, looking at the entire ecosystem. Are you offering it at times that just don't work for people? Right? Are you offering support services to make it easier for people to participate? Childcare, transportation, stipends, and things of that nature. Are you doing it at a time of day that matters? Right? And so I did a survey once. I facilitated a series of focus groups. And so I tend to want to do these in the evening, right? People were home and things of that nature. And the people who were in the focus groups were volunteering. So they weren't, so it wasn't like within one organization. It turned out that doing it right smack in the middle of the day during lunch hour is what helped people be able to attend. That in fact, doing it in the evening had lower attendance because people are taking care of dinner or they're just getting home and there's homework to help with and all these things. And I would have never thought about those things. So, looking at all the other factors that may be.
That gives me a really good idea for some interviews that I have to do coming up that I was going to try to schedule in the early evenings, but that is a good reminder.
Yeah.
The middle of the day might be better for a lot of people.
Yeah. But I also want us to touch upon, Rebecca.
Yeah. This comes up a lot in grant reporting, anticipating your impact in advance to ensure you don't fail forward to meet your program year-end directions. Yeah. And when we write these grant applications and we say, this is what we expect to have happen, right, which is an important part of every grant application, that's the time to really integrate that into the program design. And I think one of the things that goes wrong is we bring that data back, like Renee was saying, we're gathering data because we told the funder we would gather it. We bring it back to the program, and this is the first time they're hearing about it.
Yes.
Right? Maybe they were at the table when the grant was written, but they don't really remember, right? They don't remember saying, yeah, we're going to hold ourselves accountable to this outcome and that outcome. And yeah, we agree that this is the right way to measure that thing, right? So this data comes back and with a lack of context, a lack of interpretation. Right? So is this good? Is this bad? Is it better than we did last year? Is it better than the program across the street? Right? Oftentimes you don't know the first time around, right? You're lacking things like baselines and targets to let you put that conversation to work, right? Put it into context.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the cultural piece, right? Because here is where leadership matters, right? And so leaders of mission-based organizations really have to do the internal work about how they feel about data, right? Check themselves when they're talking about data to make sure that they're using it as a tool to inspire, despite of how they feel about it. Not everybody loves data, but also you keep using the word, Peter, buy-in, right? So and we're going to have a whole show just on being a learning organization. And so that's also a show about data, right? Because to learn, you have to use your information to improve your practice or to sustain a good practice. And so we'll talk about that there. But creating safe space around data,
Mhm.
What if my numbers in my department don't look good and you're having
Right.
a management team meeting and you ask me in front of 14 peers why my department numbers look the way they do? That's
Right.
not cool.
No, and that's not, I mean, that's not the conversation to have or the setting to have it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
I Go ahead.
the conversation is, first, as a group, given all of the context, what do we think about these numbers, right? And do we collectively think that we are on track here, right? And then what barriers could we remove, right? What could make this better? What other resources can we bring? It should not feel like this is all on you, program manager, right? It should feel like, hey, looks like this program needs some more resources, right? Let's, let's provide some more support about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you, when I ran research teams, oh my God, I keep saying but this is because this so resonates with everything I have experienced for years. But when I have evaluated programs, before they go in front of a management team meeting, or even before I sent them to the CEO, I ran it by the manager.
Yeah.
So that the manager was not caught by surprise.
No.
So that the manager didn't get a phone call from the CEO and say, why does your data look the way it does? And that the manager and I can have a conversation about what might be some reasons why the data looks the way it does.
Right.
And so that's creating safe space so that by the time we had the management team meeting, the program manager has had enough time to look at the data and think of reasons why this may be happening.
Right. Right. And there are formal structures that can be used in that meeting to make sure that it doesn't turn into a blaming situation, right? Or a negative situation, right? You can use certain structures in that conversation to keep it on track and keep it productive.
Do you have an example?
Well, results-based accountability is a structure where there is a set of questions that we go through. And one of those questions is not, what did you do? Right? Gosh, I think you guys messed up, right? That's not in the script. The script is, what is the story here, right? Why do you think this is the way it is, both internally and externally, right? And what are other resources that we could bring to bear? Who do we know who's had a good idea about this? Or who do we know who could help us and support this, right? And okay, now what are we going to do? And then a last step that I like to add on to that is, all right, what is everybody at this table responsible for doing now that supports this new initiative, right? It's not just, okay, manager, go off and do that. But everybody who's in the conversation should come away with a role. I'm gonna help you get these documents translated. I'm gonna help you set up transportation. I'm gonna pick up the snacks for these meetings. I'm gonna reach out to the hospital across the street and see if we can form a relationship around, our health programming, right? There's something for everybody to do.
Yeah. But that tone gets set by the leader.
And also that tone where you came into the organization as the data person and nobody was talking to you, that gets set by the leader, right?
Yes.
That's an attitude of like, well, we run the programs and then evaluation, they do some math.
Yes.
They're just over there doing math. It doesn't really have any bearing on what we do. They report out to funders as opposed to they report in to program managers. That's a cultural issue and a leadership issue, right?
Yeah. I had an ED told me the other day recently that every management, leadership, and board meeting that he has in his organization has a report that centers the conversation. They are truly data driven.
Mm-hmm.
So even if the meeting is not about data, they're constantly looking at their numbers. It's a
Yeah.
very successful program because they're ready to pivot any opportunity they see because the numbers are not going in the direction that they
Yeah.
want it to go.
And I challenge the notion that people don't actually like data, right? I think in your personal life that you are using data all the time.
All the time.
If it is important to you, you're measuring it, right? Like, is your fitness important to you? You probably have a Fitbit, right? Are you monitoring your blood pressure? You might, right? You might check that data every day, right?
Yes.
Are you monitoring something like you're trying to improve your spiritual life? Do you count how many times you went to church this month? Probably, right? So I would put to you that if you care about it, you are counting it and you are using data. What you don't like is data that other people bring you that you didn't ask for. Right? I mean, if somebody just approached me on the street and was like, I want to talk to you about your scale weight. I'd be like, no, thank you.
I would say yes. And do you have a pill?
Right. Right. No, it's not important to me. It doesn't indicate a thing that I'm working on. I don't think it's an accurate measure of what I think you think it's an accurate measure of, right? You would get all those reactions that people get when we bring it to people in their programs, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't believe that measures what I think I'm doing and the way I'm bringing value in my program, and that's why they got to be there at the beginning, right? That's why they have to be there to say like, yeah, here is the thing that I really believe is going to be happening when I'm doing my job well, right? When I'm causing the change that I want to create here. And yeah, I buy it that this proxy and what I mean when I say proxy is a thing I can measure that's a lot like the thing that I really want to know about, right? It's not exactly it, right? I can't actually measure happiness, joy, stress, right? But I can measure things that are a lot like that, right? And those are proxies, right? So, if the staff believe that proxy does indicate something important about their program in advance before they have the conversation, right? Then it makes sense to bring that proxy to the table all the time, right? The for-profit industry doesn't have this problem. They have a measure that they look at all of the time, right? That's why they're called for-profit, right?
Right.
I mean, they would never have a board meeting where they're like, we're not looking at our profits today.
Right. I love that.
We're going to follow our gut. We're going to do something different, right? We need the same thing, right? We need a central measure that we're always coming back to that tells us we're on the right track. It is not the end all be all. It doesn't tell us everything is going well, but it might tell us, oh, hold up, something is going not right, right? We need to do more digging here.
Yeah. And how about making sure you balance celebrating the good with examining why things aren't going in your direction?
We completely forgot to say that. The most important reason to track your data is so you know when to stop and celebrate, right?
Yes.
And if you're not using it for that, then obviously people are going to hate data.
Yeah. And if leaders just start there, if you just start with conversations about what's working well, and let's table the conversations about what's not, because what you also want to do when you're looking at what's working well is that you want to sustain that practice.
Yeah.
So if people are coming to a specific workshop to the point that there's a wait list for people to get in, let's look at that. First of all, let's celebrate that. But let's look at why is that working so well so we can replicate it. So let's just celebrate. Start there, leaders. Start there for 4 to 5 months, 2 quarters.
Right. Yes, just only use data for celebration and see what happens.
Yeah. I think so.
Rebecca just reminded me to mention my Facebook group, Data Informed Programs. So folks should come join us there and talk about the way you've used data to have celebrations. And I'll put a link in the comments.
Yes, yes. Well, our time is coming to an end. You know, Peter, I could talk about this all day.
And I think we should. And we will come back to it several times.
Yes, yes. But thank you for bringing up the topic, and thank you for making it about culture, right?
Yeah.
And not just there are many parts to this, and culture is definitely one of them. So thank you.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.